Hello, good morning. Happy Saturday. Today's February 8th, and it's one day until the Super Bowl, I guess, tomorrow, 2025. And we are in the Minor Prophets. This is the devotion that we have every morning at 7:30. I'm so glad that you could join us, whether it's live or sometime later in the day, or if you find us on YouTube. We're happy that you're here. And this has been, this is the 61st day, I think. Let me double check. Yeah. So for 60 days, we've gone through Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, and Micah, Nahum, and Habakkuk. Wow, we have gone through 8 of the minor prophets. There's 12 in all in the Old Testament, and today we're starting in Zephaniah. So we're doing the introduction today, part 1. It'll be a 2-part introduction because it's long. So how are you guys? Feel free to type in the chat. Good morning, Lori. And feel free to comment. We're going to be on page 305. So there's only 400 and something, well, there's like 450 pages in this book. So we're about, I don't know, 3/4 of the way through. And we're going to be looking at a portion of the introduction today. Zephaniah. Let me just read to you the really brief description that he puts about Zephaniah in the very first pages of the book. So this is page 7, and I'm at the bottom of page 7, and it says, the main theme of Zephaniah is the approaching day of Yahweh, signaling an outpouring of divine judgment, or his covenant curse, on both the pagan nations and Judah for their respective godlessness. And again, there is the concluding promise of Yahweh to bless his people and restore the fortunes of the Judean nation. So, this book, for the first 2 chapters, is. Oh, look, I'm seeing more people. Hi, Amy. Now I see Amy's on. And yeah, I know, Lori. It's been very fast, this whole thing. It seemed. We did start in November, so even though it's 60 days, there's all the weeks of, the days of in between time that occurred too. But still, I know these things go by quickly. What was I just talking about? Oh, the first 2 chapters are kind of difficult to get through, only because there's so much warnings and asking them to repent and all this stuff. But in chapter 3, when we get there, there's some really good things about restoration and just songs of joy and the humble remnant of Zion. And yeah, that part was a lot easier to read. So, all right, we'll get started here. Who is the author? It's Zephaniah, and he delivered the prophecies, but it says it could have been published by other people. And the audience is the kingdom of Judah and the surrounding nations. The date of this is during the time of King Josiah, about 640 to 609 BC, especially 630 to 622. It's amazing to me that they know these dates. Isn't it amazing that something can have happened so long ago and we still have the accurate dates? The themes are the day of Yahweh, the indictment against Judah's idolatry, Yahweh's avenging anger, catastrophic divine judgments against the nations, inevitable punishment for corruption in Jerusalem, promised hope for the future, and seeing Jesus in the book. So then we have the outline here, which I usually don't read. So we'll skip over that. You can read it if you want to. And we're on page 306 now, and it says about the book of Zephaniah. The scene depicted in the book of Zephaniah stands in stark contrast to how the authors of Kings and Chronicles portrayed Josiah's reign. So this is interesting just here from the get-go that, well, I'll finish this paragraph. Those writers called Josiah the last good king in David's royal line. This tension shows that there are at least two ways of looking at every complex situation depending on one's perspective. During times of rapid social decline, a polarization of opinions tends to emerge. Granted, Zephaniah did not call Josiah out by name, but he painted a much bleaker, more critical picture of the era than the composers of Kings and Chronicles. The Bible expresses many such tensions, and Scripture is full of paradox. This gritty authenticity rings truer than some artificially sanitized history of God's people. So I wanted to stop here for a minute because this got my attention when I was reading it. I think it's important. So what he's saying here is that Josiah the king was depicted as good in the books of Kings and Chronicles, the last good king in David's royal line. But the way Zephaniah talks about him and his ruling here in his book in Zephaniah is different. He doesn't think of him as a good king. And so what Brian Simmons is saying here is that you can have two opposite opinions of what's going on in an era, and it's okay to have those two opposing opinions. And it's better that we see that and it look conflicting, like the Bible's conflicting, like someone could read in Chronicles or Kings that Josiah was a good king, and then read here that he wasn't, and they could get like mixed up, like how is this possible? And Brian Simmons is saying that it's okay to see the different opinions of the writers, and it's better than Zephaniah having to line up with the writers of Chronicles and Kings and change his opinion when he didn't feel that that was really the true depiction of the king, so of Josiah. So I thought about our current situation today in the earth and how we have such severe opinions about our former president and now our current president, and how people are polarized against or for one or the other and have their opinions. And it sort of reminded me of that and how we can kind of relate to that because it's our history right now. How just with our current president, there are people who are completely convinced that he is, a gift from God. And then there's people that are completely convinced that he's a man to be feared and that he'll ruin things and that, he shouldn't be in office. Obviously, they've tried to make that happen for a long time. So there can be polarizing opinions in these different eras, but it doesn't make the Bible not true. It just means that the people, I hope I'm explaining this right, it just means that the people that wrote, I don't know right now off the top of my head who wrote Kings and Chronicles, but their opinion differed of this king than Zephaniah's opinion. let me ask who wrote the book of Kings? Let me ask my phone. Oh, it's unknown, so it could have been the prophet Jeremiah, who was a contemporary. Okay, so maybe it was Jeremiah and maybe he had a different opinion. I think it's interesting both are prophets that wrote the books, so we would think prophets would line up with their take on things, but maybe they don't always. All right, so Zephaniah started at home, speaking truth to the powers that be in Judah. He then broadened his warnings to the surrounding nations. He closed, as prophets often do, with a message of hope, and later readers, after the destruction of Judah and the rebuilding of the temple, the second temple, could see fulfillment in both Zephaniah's scathing critique and his prospect of promise. Fulfilled as the remnant returned from exile to rebuild the nation. So there is a message of hope at the end. It's hard to find explicit New Testament references to Zephaniah except perhaps in Matthew 13. Matthew 13:44 could be an allusion to the Hebrew meaning of Zephaniah's name. Let me get to Matthew 13. I love the meaning of his name. It means the Lord hides or the Lord treasures. And in Matthew 13, verses 40 through 52, it talks about, well, especially from 44, it talks about the parable of the hidden treasure and the hidden pearl. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. So they're saying here maybe they were alluding to him in these verses because of the meaning of his name, but there's really no other mention of him in the New Testament. Zephaniah wrote totally in poetry. I know my sister writes poetry, don't you, Gail? I wonder if anyone else on here does. Zephaniah's poetic style is characterized by the use of staccato exclamations, rapid changes of vantage point and voice, discourse, rhetorical questions, and frequent wordplay and metaphors. Zephaniah's language was graphic, potent, and pointed. Perhaps no other prophet has painted the picture of Jerusalem's decline more realistically. He described a time of terrible gloom and inevitable cataclysmic judgments on the horizon. He coupled with a glorious promise of hope and salvation for his people. With burning eloquence, he alternated his prophecies between stern warnings and soothing comforts. I don't know how these people write this way. It's kind of amazing to me. You think about just the gift that they have in writing. We should be so grateful. Okay, and then we have the purpose. We cannot limit the book of Zephaniah to any single interpretation. Much like any gifted writer, Zephaniah cloaked his words in just enough mystery to fit broader applications of universal truth. The prophet Zephaniah may have been the greatest master of creating word art of such unlimited relevance. His message often applies to today's situations as well as it did millennia ago, even when totally detached from the context that brought it forth. As an example, Zephaniah's enemy from the north could fit various invaders from Scythians who raided the area during this time to the superpowers of Babylon and Persia. So there's different people that were considered their enemies. However, what is clear is that the multifaceted applications of Zephaniah's prophecy are fully consistent with the dominant overreaching theme of the book, the day of Yahweh. This phenomenon is one of the richest and most complex of all scriptural prophetic motifs. Hence, it follows that the prophecies of blessings of the day of Yahweh contain multiple levels of fulfillment. So the day of Yahweh isn't just a one-time occurrence. The first iterations of fulfillment occurred comparatively shortly after the prophecies were given, in the return of God's people from exile to their land. Then a more climatic fulfillment appeared in the person and work of Jesus Christ. What has yet to follow is its absolute consummation at the end of time, when Jesus will return to usher in the new heavens and the new earth in the eternal heavenly kingdom. That's the one we're waiting for. Zephaniah held law and gospel in Christian theological terms in balance. God speaks his no, and God speaks his yes. We are to take both with utter sobriety and seriousness. The promise of yes prevails in the end, but is born out of that uncomfortable tension between law and gospel, the paradox in which we live our daily lives. And God's greatest promise did not come to us without a cost, did it? It required the crucifixion of Jesus. Like a good surgeon, Zephaniah didn't pretend that healing would come without the use of a sharp scalpel. He reminded us that healing means blood will be shed, and it will, as it was in Jesus' sacrifice. So there's a tension between the law and the gospel here, the grace of God and what God requires. And he doesn't mind talking about it. Zephaniah wrote to reveal God's passion for righteousness, justice, and virtue among his people. If these prophecies took place before Josiah's reform, they may well have catalyzed that renewal. Because of Zephaniah's universalizing writing style, it stands to reason that he intended his words to help warn people at any time. And in any place, and give them hope in all kinds of situations. Okay. He intended his words to help warn people at any time and in any place, and to give them hope in all kinds of situations. So that's what a true friend does, right? He warns us, or she warns us, if we're going off a cliff, but they also provide so much hope when we are facing difficulties. All right, and then the author and the audience, this next section at the bottom of page 308. This book gives us few clues about Zephaniah himself. It just amazes me that somebody can have a place in the Bible and we don't know much about them. They're kind of discreet, I guess. It's not about them. We see him as a man of passion and integrity, a man of joyful song, which is so cool at the end of in the middle of chapter 3, who possessed great courage and boldness as a prophet. I just thought about how prophets are such courageous people when I was reading this, and we have to just be so thankful for their courage to do what they're supposed to do, to say what they're supposed to say. And I want us to be courageous too. I want to be courageous to do that. The introduction in chapter 1, verse 1 seems to imply that he was descended from King Hezekiah. Some scholars think that this could be any Hezekiah, but that would require a qualifier, especially with another king, Josiah, being mentioned in a parallel manner. So Brian Simmons is saying he's probably saying that he is a descendant from King Hezekiah and not another Hezekiah. Likely he was very comfortable among the ruling class and not some radical outsider like Amos was. Critique from inside the system can be especially effective, and he and Josiah may even have been cousins. That's amazing. There's a note at the bottom of where he got that information from, an introduction to the Old Testament by R.B. Dillard and T. Longman. All right, and then Zephaniah was a contemporary of Nahum, Jeremiah, and Huldah the prophetess. And his name means the Lord hides or the Lord treasures. Both Zephaniah and you are treasured by the Lord and hidden in his heart. I love this so much. Let me look up this verse. Colossians 3, verses 2 and 3 says, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, for you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. I love that. So you're treasured by the Lord and you're hidden in his heart. And I did look up Huldah because I didn't remember about her in the Bible. She was a prophetess, and she's mentioned in 2 Kings 22:14 through 20, and she's also in 2 Chronicles 34, verses 22 through 28. After the discovery of a book of the law during renovations at Solomon's temple, she was approached to validate the scroll. So she was asked to make sure that it was something that they should read and consider as part of the law or the covenant. So that's a cool assignment from the Lord that she got to, hundreds of years ago, decide if something should be canonical or not. It purportedly was found in the temple during repairs ordered by King Josiah, which we just read. There are 5 female prophetesses in the Bible, and probably the most well-known, well, there's a couple well-known ones, but Deborah for sure, and then Miriam, the sister of Moses, and Huldah, and then I don't know this one, Noadiah. She appears during the restoration from exile, and then also Isaiah's wife, who is unnamed, but Isaiah was married to a prophetess. And so there's 5 women here. Huldah was the prophetess. She's a vivid example of a godly woman who answered God's call to speak his word. And I think it's weird that her name means weasel or mole. Who would name their child weasel or mole? And it tells me that you can definitely rise above your name, right? Or rise above what was given to you at birth. I think that'll preach right there. If you were at birth given the name Huldah, you can definitely become a prophetess of the Lord. And I love that. That's very hopeful for all of us. Okay, so that's where we're going to end today. Tomorrow we'll go into the themes, the major themes. And then there's 3 chapters that we'll be reading in this book of Zephaniah. So it's good to see you all. I'm glad you had the time to get on this morning. I hope you have a good day. And I'll see you tomorrow at 7:30 at the same time. God bless you. All right, bye-bye.